I wanted to talk through this case because we ran out of time in today's class. Anyway, let's think about this pollution problem. We saw the video. These farmers are putting all sorts of nitrogen-based fertilizers on their crops to help them grow, and because they need to drain their crops to keep the land just the right level of moisture, not too much in particular, they they have drain tiles. That's pipes that um, take off water away off the farm and dump it in the waterways that end up in the river. All right, so that uh, runoff from the farms, whether is considered groundwater coming out of these tiles that collect the water and hurry it off the property, or whether it's viewed as surface water, the economic issue doesn't matter. The legal issue does matter because of the way the Clean Water Act is written, apparently. Anyway, there's this pollution problem. So let's think about it, conceptualizing it in economic terms, and let's think about policy. So the first part is the technical analysis. Let's walk through that. Um, let's think about the policies. We could limit the amount of fertilizer allowed on each acre of farmland. That's like a command and control approach, and we wouldn't be differentiating between the farms that were far away from water and whose drain tiles emptied into a contained pond that filters out the nitrates before they ever reach the waterway, and the farms that are right on the river and their effluent is dumping right into the river, and that would matter, right? So um, we we that command and control approach is not great, and it ends up with a high cost of compliance and not as much cleanup as we could get for the resources spent on it. So that command and control, the general idea is that's not a great approach. So, sometimes it's the best we can do, but generally that's not great. So we're going to not consider that one. Um, the next three are each a possibility. We could tax each ton of nitrate fertilizer. Let's go back to that technical analysis. These these assigning property rights could work, right? If private property rights were clearly assigned to either the city or the farmers, um, you know, they would be able to go, if it's to the city, they'd be able to say, hey, farmers, stop putting the pollution or pay us. And or if it were the farmers, they would be able to say, City of Des Moines, hey, either compensate us for doing it to raise our crops without nitrate fertilizer or with less nitrate fertilizer, or just filter the water. And theoretically, if it was a lot cheaper to compensate the farmers than filtering the water, then the City of Des Moines would pay the farmers. Likewise, if the farmers value the access to the water more than enough to pay for City of Des Moines cleanup costs, well, then they could just pay, right? So assigning property rights, in theory, could work. The problem here is several-fold. One is there's just so many farmers, and it's hard to get an agreement with so many people. So that can be difficult. The other thing we saw from the video is just how the farmers believe that they're God's gift to Iowa. Iowa wouldn't even be a state without the farmers, and they have the right to use all of Iowa's resources. The rest of Iowa just exists because of the corn farms there, and should do everything they can to promote that industry. And anybody that sees differently should just get out of Iowa, right? That was the attitude we saw on the part of that several of those speakers on the farming side. Likewise, the city of Des Moines feels wronged. These farmers are polluting the water that should be kept clean. It's just wrong. So that sense of moral outrage, that strong sense of fair and unfair, well, it's that gets us really far away from, oh, I value the resource by X and you value it by Y. Let's make a deal. No, if we're morally outraged, we're not going to come to a deal. That's just like there being a huge negotiation cost. So I think in this case, one could make an argument for assigning property rights clearly, but whether that gets us to an efficient outcome or not, I bet, like so many other situations, whoever had the property rights would just insist that the other party clean up rather than negotiating in good faith. That's the way it often works, and that isn't sometimes that's efficient, but sometimes it isn't. Frank actually writes arguing that in history, lawmakers have tried to give the property rights to the party that values the resource most highly. It's an interesting exploration of economic history, actually. All right, so any of B, C, or D are credible responses, and I would have hoped for an argument in class. And, we'll never know what would happen because it didn't. We're on to the next topic, next class. I wrote down the supply and demand graph, assuming nitrates are made and sold in competitive marketplace. Market's clear at um, the point where supply and demand intersect, the point where marginal private value is equal to marginal private cost. Well, if there's an externality issue, that market outcome is not efficient in the sense that we'll articulate now. Let's think about what happens when social costs are higher than private costs. That's how we model this externality. I guess before I get there, let me point out that uh, I'm modeling the market for nitrate fertilizer. I could have as easily chosen the corn market. Either one of those would work. What would not work is to analyze the market for clean water. There is no working market for the value for the trades, the environmental amenity of clean river water. That market doesn't exist. Those resources aren't priced. That's the problem. Economic agents, the farmers in this case, or the nitrate fertilizers, fertilizer makers are able to use up this clean water and not have to pay anybody for it. So they use it as though it's free, and that means they use too much. That's the fundamental problem of an externality. All right, how do we model this? First off, we pick a market sector that is creating the pollution problem. The environmental destruction is external, outside of that market, but we analyze it in this market framework. All right, so how do we analyze it? We suppose that there's just a constant marginal external cost. So the marginal social cost lies above the marginal private cost curve. The vertical distance between those two is always the marginal external cost at whatever level of output we're talking about. All right, here it's constant, it doesn't matter. So the key insight here is that the market produces too much fertilizer or too much corn if we were analyzing the corn market. I'm not going to worry about what market price is, but notice that market quantity at the desirable, the socially efficient level is much lower than the market outcome that results before environmental regulation is imposed. So we remember that every ton of fertilizer after Q star costs society more than it benefits people in society. If we sum up the excess of costs over benefits in that market, we get this shaded red area as deadweight loss. Take a few moments to remember that deadweight loss area lies above the demand curve and below the marginal social cost curve. That's critical. A lot of students want to put it down here, and that's it, the way I've drawn it with constant marginal external cost. The technical area of the triangle would be the same, but oftentimes we have increasing marginal external costs, and those two areas would be different. In any case, conceptually, it's the excess of costs, social costs over benefits summed up over all the excess output. That's deadweight loss. So conceptually, it's important to map it above this marginal social value function. All right, back to the policy question, and I won't belabor this point, but I wanted to talk about a couple things here. The ideal tax would charge exactly the marginal external cost, and in that case, the marginal private cost plus the tax would coincide with the marginal social cost. And then if we knew so much as to put that tax into place, then we could sort of hunt and peck for it based on how much cleanup we got at different levels of taxes. In that case, we'd get the efficient outcome, and we'd collect some tax revenues, and that's pretty good strategy. And the tax approach lets firms that can clean up cheaper, if they can develop if we're making nitrate fertilizer, that's pollutive. But if we were doing corn farmers, maybe there are some farmers that have really rich land and a non-nitrate fertilizer can get them to just almost as much as good, almost as much corn, but um, at a very low adjustment cost. Whereas other people need the fertilizer, or they're just their land is dead and can't produce much. So the tax would let the um, the farmers themselves decide whether to pay for the fertilizer or uh, sorry, whether to stop using the fertilizer and pay the tax, or whether to keep using it and pay the tax. Um, so we get a lower cost to clean up. All right, so there's a lot to be said for the tax, and that's a credible choice.